Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Scholar. Tonight's journey takes us through the quiet world of human senses, where sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell gently shape every moment of life. Along the way, you will learn how the brain blends these signals into one smooth experience, and how some senses work so quietly that we rarely notice them at all. If you enjoy these quiet explorations, consider subscribing so you can easily return here whenever you need to rest. For now, get comfortable. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let's begin. Human senses are not separate channels, but a quiet team that the brain blends into one steady experience. Every waking moment, light reaches the eyes, air vibrations touch the ears, chemicals meet the nose and tongue, and pressure or warmth moves across the skin. At the same time, less noticed systems report balance, body position, and signals from within the organs. The remarkable part is that these streams do not usually arrive as a cluttered pile of data. The brain combines them so smoothly that the world feels whole, stable, and immediate. A cup seems warm, fragrant, smooth, and visible all at once. A room feels spacious before you consciously list what you saw or heard. Much of ordinary life depends on this silent cooperation. Human sensation is not only about detecting the outside world, it is also about turning countless small signals into a single calm sense of being present. Vision is less like a camera recording everything, and more like an active process of selecting what matters. The eyes gather light, but the brain decides how that light becomes edges, depth, motion, and familiar shapes. Only a small central area of vision gives the sharp detail used for reading and close inspection. The rest is broader and less precise, yet still extremely useful for movement and awareness. This is why people shift their gaze so often without noticing it. Tiny eye movements keep updating the scene, and the brain stitches those brief glimpses into a stable picture. What feels like one wide, detailed image is built from many small samples. The result is efficient and elegant. Human sight does not need to hold every detail equally at once. It only needs to gather the right pieces at the right time, then weave them together into the seamless world most people trust without a thought. The eye has a natural blind spot, yet most people never notice it because the brain quietly fills in what is missing. This blind spot exists where the optic nerve leaves the back of the eye, creating a place with no light-sensitive cells. In theory, that should leave a small gap in every visual scene. In practice, the brain compares information from both eyes, uses surrounding patterns, and makes a best estimate of what belongs there. The result is so smooth that the absence usually disappears from awareness. This is one of the gentlest examples of how perception is an interpretation rather than a raw copy of reality. Human senses often give a trustworthy picture, but they do so through intelligent reconstruction. The world does not feel patched together, and that is precisely the wonder. A natural gap in the visual system becomes almost invisible, not through magic, but through quiet neural skill working all the time. Color is not contained inside objects themselves, but arises from the way the visual system interprets light. Surfaces reflect different mixtures of wavelengths, and specialized cells in the retina respond to those differences. From there, the brain compares signals and creates the experience called red, blue, green, gold, or gray. This means color is both physical and deeply biological. The outside world provides the light, but the nervous system turns that light into a felt quality. It is one reason color can seem to shift at sunset, under candlelight, or in shade. The brain constantly tries to keep colors fairly stable, even when illumination changes. A white page still looks white in the morning and in the evening, despite the light being very different. This quiet correction is called color constancy. It helps the world remain familiar and dependable. Much of the comfort of seeing comes from this steadying work happening beneath awareness. Hearing begins when tiny changes in air pressure become meaningful sound inside the ear and brain. A closing door, distant rain, whispered speech, and music all start as vibrations moving through the air. The outer ear helps gather these waves, and the middle ear passes them inward through 3 very small bones. Deep in the inner ear, the cochlea turns vibration into electrical signals by bending delicate hair cells. Different parts of this spiral structure respond best to different frequencies, so pitch begins to separate almost at once. From there, the brain identifies rhythm, loudness, direction, and tone. Sound is especially intimate because it arrives from every side and can reach a listener even in darkness or with closed eyes. It can warn, guide, soothe, or connect. Human hearing is not simply the detection of noise. It is a finely tuned system for finding pattern in motion and turning invisible waves into rich experience. The ears help locate sound by comparing tiny differences in timing and loudness between the left and right sides. When a bird calls from one side, the sound usually reaches one ear a fraction of a moment before the other. It may also be slightly louder on the nearer side, especially for higher sounds. These differences are incredibly small, yet the brain uses them with striking accuracy. The shape of the outer ear adds more clues by changing how sound reflects into the ear canal, which helps with judging elevation and front versus back position. This is why a listener can often turn toward a voice almost instantly, long before consciously thinking about where it came from. Sound becomes a kind of invisible map. The world announces its positions through echoes and timing. Human hearing does not merely receive information. It places events in space, letting people sense movement and distance through the faintest differences carried on air. Touch is not one single sense, but a collection of systems spread across the skin and deeper tissues. Some receptors respond best to gentle pressure, some to vibration, some to stretch, and others to signals related to injury or extreme temperature. Because of this variety, a hand resting on wood can register firmness, grain, warmth, and stillness all at once. Different parts of the body are tuned differently. Fingertips and lips are especially sensitive, which helps with delicate tasks, speech, and exploring texture. The back and legs may notice broader contact without the same fine detail. Touch is often the first sense to develop before birth, and it remains a constant background companion throughout life. It confirms boundaries, surfaces, movement, and contact with the world. What seems like a simple sensation is really a layered conversation between skin, nerves, spinal pathways, and brain regions that give pressure its meaning and make texture feel real. Temperature is sensed by specialized nerve endings that respond to warming and cooling, giving the skin a quiet awareness of the environment. A stone floor feels cool, a mug feels warm, and a breeze feels different again because the skin is constantly comparing itself with what touches it. This sense is closely linked to touch, yet it has its own pathways and its own importance. The body uses temperature information not only to describe the outside world, but also to help maintain internal balance. Feeling chilled may lead to movement, clothing, or shelter long before body temperature changes much. Warmth can signal sunlight, fire, another person's hand, or the comfort of water. Temperature perception is also relative. The same lukewarm water can feel cooler or warmer, depending on what the skin touched just before. Human senses are often about contrast rather than absolutes. The skin does not simply read heat. It interprets change, context, and relationship. Pain is a protective sense that alerts the body to potential harm, and its purpose is guidance rather than punishment. Specialized pathways respond to events that may damage tissue, such as excessive heat, strong pressure, or certain chemical changes linked to injury. Yet pain is not a simple alarm wire. The brain evaluates the signal, considers context, and can turn the experience up or down. Attention, expectation, fear, and safety all influence how strongly pain is felt. This does not make pain imaginary. It shows how protective the system truly is. The body is trying to judge not only what happened, but how urgent it may be. In everyday life, mild discomfort often teaches small lessons quickly. A hot pan is released, a twisted ankle is rested, a splinter is removed. Among the human senses, pain is the one most clearly tied to survival. Even so, its deeper story is regulation, interpretation, and care for the body. Smell has an unusually direct route into brain areas linked with memory and emotion, which helps explain why odors can feel vivid and immediate. When airborne molecules enter the nose, they dissolve in mucus and bind to receptors high in the nasal cavity. These receptors send signals to the olfactory bulb, which then connects with brain networks involved in recognition, feeling, and stored experience. Because of this arrangement, a familiar scent can sometimes summon a place or season before a person has named it. The smell of rain on dry ground, soap from childhood, old paper, pine wood, or warm bread may arrive with a quiet sense of time attached. Smell is also deeply chemical and precise. Tiny amounts of certain molecules can be enough to create a noticeable impression. Human olfaction is often less celebrated than sight or hearing, yet it remains one of the most intimate senses, turning invisible traces in the air into atmosphere and memory. Taste begins on the tongue, but what people call flavor is a blend of taste, smell, touch, and even temperature. Taste buds respond to a small set of basic qualities, including sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. The savory taste linked to certain amino acids. These signals help identify energy-rich foods, mineral content, acidity, possible toxins, and protein-related nutrients. Yet a strawberry or a cup of tea feels far more complex than 5 simple categories. Much of that richness comes from smell, especially when molecules travel from the mouth up into the nose during eating. This is why food seems oddly flat during a blocked nose. The mouth also contributes texture, crispness, creaminess, spice, and warmth. Flavor is therefore a joint creation rather than a single sense. Human tasting is not just about deciding whether something is sweet or bitter. It is about building a full edible landscape from several sensory layers at once. Proprioception is a sense that tells the brain where the body is, even with the eyes closed. Receptors in muscles, tendons, and joints report stretch, tension, and movement, allowing a person to touch their nose in the dark or place a foot on a stair without staring at it. This hidden sense is so constant that it is easy to forget it exists. Yet almost every gesture depends on it. Reaching for a cup, typing on a keyboard, buttoning a shirt, or walking through a familiar room all require continuous internal updates about limb position. The brain blends this information with touch and vision, but proprioception can guide action on its own for many ordinary tasks. It gives the body a felt shape from within. Among human senses, it is one of the quietest and most useful. It does not paint the outside world. It creates the inward map that makes movement feel coordinated, steady, and confidently owned. Balance depends on delicate organs in the inner ear that sense rotation, tilt, and straight line movement. Deep beside the cochlea lies the vestibular system, made up of fluid-filled canals and small chambers containing tiny crystals. When the head turns or the body accelerates, fluid shifts and these crystals move, bending sensory hair cells. The brain reads those changes as motion. This system works closely with vision and proprioception, which is why standing upright feels simple, even though it requires constant adjustment. The vestibular sense also helps steady the eyes. When the head moves, reflexes keep the gaze relatively stable so the world does not smear into a blur. Most of this happens automatically and almost instantly. Human balance is not a static condition, but an ongoing conversation among several senses. The body sways, corrects, and settles every moment. What feels like stillness is often a very graceful form of continuous motion control. Sensory adaptation allows the nervous system to reduce attention to steady, unchanging input so that new information stands out. This is why a watch on the wrist may fade from awareness, why a room's background hum can seem to disappear, and why a familiar scent becomes less noticeable after a few minutes. The receptors and brain pathways involved do not simply shut off, but they adjust their response when a signal remains constant. This is efficient. If every stable sensation stayed equally vivid, important changes would be harder to detect. A new footstep, a shift in temperature, or the faint smell of smoke might be buried in sensory clutter. Adaptation helps the world remain manageable. It quietly clears the stage for what is fresh or important. Human senses are therefore not designed to report everything with equal force. They are designed to notice difference, and difference often carries the most useful message about what needs attention. The human brain is especially good at detecting contrast, which is why senses often respond more strongly to change than to steady conditions. A dim light looks brighter in darkness than in daylight. A cool breeze feels cooler after leaving a warm room. A whisper can seem striking in a quiet hallway, yet vanish in a crowded station. This principle appears across many sensory systems. Vision notices edges where light changes. Hearing tracks shifts in loudness or pitch. Touch becomes more informative when texture changes from smooth to rough or stillness to movement. Contrast helps the nervous system organize the world into meaningful parts. Without it, scenes would blur together and events would lose their boundaries. Human perception often depends less on absolute measurement than on comparison. The senses are constantly asking what differs from the background, what has just changed, and what stands out against what came before. Much of ordinary clarity is built on these subtle acts of comparison. The eyes and ears work together so closely that seeing a speaker's face can change what is heard. In everyday conversation, lip movements, facial timing, and head position help the brain interpret speech sounds, especially in noise. This partnership is so strong that under certain conditions, conflicting visual and auditory cues can create the impression of a different syllable than the one actually spoken. the effect reveals something important about human senses. Perception is not divided into neat compartments. The brain combines evidence from several channels and settles on the most likely interpretation. This usually improves accuracy rather than causing confusion. A listener in a busy room often understands speech better by watching the speaker. Sight supports sound, and sound supports sight in return. The world becomes clearer through cooperation. Human sensing is therefore not a row of isolated instruments, but a kind of ensemble, where each system contributes, and the final experience emerges from their agreement. Interoception is the sense of the body's internal condition, including signals related to hunger, thirst, heartbeat, breathing effort, and fullness. These sensations do not always arrive with sharp clarity, yet they shape daily life in profound ways. A dry mouth suggests water. An empty feeling in the stomach suggests food. A racing heart may indicate exertion, excitement, or strain. Interoception helps the brain monitor the body as a living system rather than a machine on autopilot. It contributes to comfort, self-awareness, and the regulation of energy and temperature. Many people think of the senses as tools for knowing the outside world, but internal sensing is just as essential. Without it, the body's needs would be harder to read and respond to in time. Among human senses, interoception is one of the most private. It forms the quiet background sense of how one is doing from the inside, moment by moment. The skin is the body's largest sensory surface, creating a wide and responsive boundary between self and world. It does far more than cover the body. Through countless receptors, it notices pressure, vibration, stretch, warmth, cooling, itch, and signals related to possible harm. Because it is spread so broadly, the skin gives constant updates about clothing, air movement, posture, contact, and surroundings. Different regions specialize in different kinds of information. Fingertips can detect very fine texture, while the face is highly alert to light touch and temperature shifts. Hairy skin can even register faint movement as hairs bend. This broad sensory sheet helps define where the body ends and the outside world begins. It is one reason a person can feel sheltered by a blanket, startled by a cold tile, or instantly aware of an insect landing on the arm. Human sensation often starts at the boundary, where contact becomes knowledge. Texture perception shows how richly the hand can explore the world through motion as well as contact. A surface may feel smooth, rough, sticky, silky, ridged, powdery, or soft, and these qualities are not detected by a single receptor type alone. The nervous system combines information from pressure, vibration, skin stretch, and tiny finger movements across the material. Active touch matters. Sliding a fingertip over wood grain or woven cloth reveals more than resting still on the same surface. The hand is not only receiving sensation, it is investigating. This makes touch one of the most practical and quietly intelligent human senses. It can identify familiar objects in the dark, estimate the sharpness of an edge, or judge whether fruit is ripe enough to eat. Texture is not a minor detail added to perception after the fact. It is part of how reality becomes specific, tangible, and closely known. Hearing can separate a complex sound scene into meaningful streams, allowing a listener to follow one voice among many. In a crowded room, dozens of sounds may overlap at once: footsteps, cutlery, distant laughter, low music, and several conversations. Yet the auditory system can often group sound by pitch, timing, rhythm, and direction, helping one thread stand out from the rest. This ability is sometimes called auditory scene analysis, It is part of why a person can notice their name across a room or focus on a companion's words, while other voices continue nearby. The skill is impressive because sound mixes together in the air before it reaches the ears. The separation happens largely in the nervous system. Human hearing is therefore not only about detecting vibrations, it is about organizing them into sources and events. A crowded soundscape becomes navigable because the brain quietly sorts the chorus into distinct parts. The eyes are always moving in small ways, and these movements help vision stay clear and alive. Even during steady gaze, the eyes make tiny adjustments called microsaccades, along with other small drifts and tremors. Larger rapid shifts, called saccades, move the point of focus from one place to another several times each second. These motions are so normal that people rarely notice them. Yet without them, visual perception would be poorer. Small movements prevent the image on the retina from fading too much, and larger ones let the high detail center of vision sample important parts of the scene. The brain suppresses the blur that would otherwise accompany these quick shifts, which is why the world does not appear to jerk each time the eyes move. Human sight feels stable, partly because motion inside the visual system is so carefully managed. Stillness in perception often depends on movement happening just below awareness. The senses remain flexible across life, and the brain can reorganize how it uses sensory information when circumstances change. This adaptability is one form of neuroplasticity, the nervous system's ability to alter its connections and habits through experience. Practice can sharpen discrimination, as in musicians becoming more sensitive to pitch patterns, or craftspeople learning to notice fine textures by touch. When one sense is reduced, other systems may become more heavily relied upon, and the brain can devote more attention to those remaining channels. This does not create magical compensation, but it can lead to real changes in skill and strategy. Human senses are therefore not fixed instruments set once and for all. They are living systems shaped by use, context, and learning. Perception grows with the person. The world does not arrive in exactly the same way for everyone, and part of that quiet variation comes from the brain's lifelong ability to adapt. Rods and cones are two different kinds of light-sensitive cells in the retina, and each supports a different style of seeing. Cones work best in brighter conditions and help provide color vision and fine detail, especially in the central part of the visual field. Rods are more sensitive to low light and are especially valuable in dim settings, though they do not support rich color in the same way. This is why colors seem to fade at dusk, while shapes may remain visible. The center of the retina, called the fovea, is packed with cones, which makes it ideal for reading and careful inspection. Areas farther from the center contain more rods, which helps with night vision and broad awareness. Human sight is therefore not uniform across the eye. Different regions are tuned for different jobs, allowing the visual system to balance sharp detail, motion awareness, and sensitivity in darkness. Dark adaptation is a gradual sensory adjustment that lets the eyes become more useful in low light over time. When a person moves from daylight into a dim room or steps outside at night, vision does not reach its best sensitivity instantly. Part of the change involves the pupils widening, but that is only one piece of the process. More important changes happen in the retina, where light-sensitive pigments recover and the visual system becomes better at responding to faint signals. Cones adjust fairly quickly, while rods take longer, and continue improving sensitivity over many minutes. This is why stars often seem to multiply the longer someone remains in the dark. At first, the sky may look sparse, and then it slowly grows richer. Human vision is remarkably adaptable, but it works on time as well as light. Darkness is not simply entered. It is gradually learned by the eyes. Depth perception depends on many clues working together, allowing a flat image on the retina to become a world with distance and shape. One powerful cue comes from binocular disparity, the small difference between the views seen by the two eyes. Because each eye looks from a slightly different position, the brain can compare the two images and estimate depth. Yet depth does not vanish when only one eye is used. The visual system also relies on shadows, perspective, relative size, texture gradients, overlap, and motion. A nearby object often moves across the visual field differently from one that is far away, and lines in the distance seem to narrow toward each other. These cues help people judge stairs, doorways, hills, and hand positions with little conscious effort. Human sight is skilled at turning two-dimensional inputs into three-dimensional understanding. The sense of space feels natural because the brain is quietly solving geometry all day long. Peripheral vision is especially sensitive to movement, which helps the body notice change outside the point of direct focus. The center of vision is better for fine detail, but the edges of the visual field are often quicker to register that something has shifted. A person reading may suddenly notice a hand wave from the side, or someone walking through a forest may detect a faint rustle before identifying what caused it. This arrangement is highly practical. Fine detail is useful for inspection, but motion at the margins can signal opportunity, company, or danger. The visual system does not treat every part of space equally because different parts serve different purposes. Peripheral vision gives broad awareness and helps guide posture, navigation, and orientation. It may not reveal the tiny print on a label, but it is often the first to tell the brain that the world has changed. Human sight is wide partly because change rarely waits at the center. Timbre is the quality that allows the ear to tell one sound source from another, even when pitch and loudness are similar. A piano and a violin can play the same note, yet they do not sound alike. The difference comes from the shape of the sound wave and the mix of higher frequencies, often called harmonics, that accompany the main pitch. The attack and decay of a sound matter too. A plucked string begins differently from a sung vowel or a blown flute tone, and the ear notices these patterns with remarkable ease. Timbre is one reason voices are recognizable and instruments seem to have character. It turns simple frequency into identity. Human hearing is therefore not limited to asking how high or low a sound is. It also asks what kind of thing produced it. Much of the richness of listening comes from this ability to hear structure, material, and source within a single note. Each is a distinct sensory experience with its own purpose, even though it can feel related to touch and pain. Certain nerve pathways respond to chemical and mechanical events that suggest irritation on or near the skin, such as an insect crawling, a small bite, dryness, or substances that trigger inflammation. The resulting sensation often leads to scratching, which can be useful when something small needs to be removed from the skin surface. Yet scratching can also intensify irritation if it continues too much, showing that sensory guidance is not always perfect. Itch is interesting because it occupies its own middle ground. It is not simply light pain, and it is not ordinary touch. It calls for a very particular kind of attention. Among human senses, itch is one of the clearest examples of a specialized signal for a narrow practical problem. The body is saying that something at the boundary deserves a closer response. Gentle stroking touch is processed in part by nerve fibers that seem especially tuned for slow, soft contact on hairy skin. These fibers, often called C-tactile afferents, respond differently from the fast pathways that help identify exact location, pressure, or texture. Their signals are linked less with fine discrimination and more with the emotional tone of touch. This suggests that the skin carries not only practical information about surfaces and contact, but also information relevant to comfort, bonding, and social closeness. A hand on the shoulder, a reassuring stroke on the arm, or the soft brushing of hair can feel meaningful in a way that goes beyond simple pressure. Human touch is therefore both analytical and effective. It can tell what touched the skin, and it can help shape how that contact is experienced. The body does not merely register touch. In some cases, it quietly reads care, familiarity, and warmth in the pattern of contact itself. Taste buds are not permanent structures that last unchanged for life, but living sensory units that renew themselves over time. Cells within taste buds gradually wear out and are replaced, allowing the system to maintain function in a demanding environment of chewing, swallowing, temperature shifts, and constant chemical exposure. This renewal is one reason the sense of taste can remain stable through ordinary use, despite the rough conditions inside the mouth. Taste buds are found not only on the tongue, but also in nearby regions, such as parts of the soft palate and throat. They are grouped within papillae, the small structures visible on the tongue surface, though not all papillae contain taste buds. Human taste is often imagined as a fixed map, but it is better understood as a maintained surface, always being repaired and refreshed. Even this familiar sense carries a quiet rhythm of renewal, as if the mouth keeps rebuilding its own doorway to flavor. Saliva is essential to taste because many flavor-related molecules must dissolve before taste receptors can respond to them well. Food entering the mouth is not simply pressed against the tongue like a key against a lock. Instead, saliva helps break substances into a form that can spread across the tongue and reach the sensory cells inside taste buds. It also supports chewing, swallowing, and the general comfort of the mouth, making it one of the most overlooked partners in eating. When the mouth is unusually dry, flavors may seem weaker or less balanced, not because the food has changed, but because the sensing environment has. Human taste therefore depends on chemistry and moisture, as much as on receptors themselves. The experience of flavor begins in a wet, active space where food is being mixed, dissolved, and prepared for detection. Even before swallowing, the mouth is already working like a small laboratory of sensation. Human smell relies on a large family of receptor types, and each odor is recognized through patterns rather than one-to-one labels. A single odor molecule can activate several receptor kinds, and each receptor kind can respond to more than one molecule. The brain reads the resulting combination like a code. This system allows a limited set of receptor types to detect a vast range of smells, from smoke and citrus to soil, soap, leaves, and coffee. It is a flexible design, more like using letters to form many words than keeping a separate lock for every possible scent. Once patterns reach higher brain areas, they can be linked with memory, meaning, and emotional tone. Human smell is therefore not simple matching. It is pattern recognition in chemical form. The air carries mixed signals, and the nervous system learns how to distinguish them, group them, and give them a place in the familiar sensory world. Humans are especially sensitive to certain earthy smells, including compounds associated with soil after rain. One well-known example is geosmin, a molecule produced by certain microorganisms in the ground. Even in very small amounts, it can create that fresh, earthy impression many people notice when dry land is dampened. The pleasant smell, often linked with rainfall, is more complex than one substance alone. But this sensitivity shows how finely tuned the olfactory system can be. The nose does not need a thick cloud of odor to create a vivid impression. Tiny traces may be enough. This is part of what makes smell feel intimate and atmospheric. A whole landscape can seem to change through a faint shift in the air. Human senses sometimes work with grand signals, like bright light or loud sound, but smell often reveals its power through delicacy. A nearly invisible chemical trace can make the world feel newly washed and alive. The mouth and nose contain a chemical warning system that is separate from ordinary taste and smell, and it helps explain sensations such as minty coolness or chilly heat. This system is often called chemesthesis, and it depends largely on the trigeminal nerve and related pathways, rather than on taste buds alone. Menthol does not literally lower temperature, but it activates receptors involved in cool sensation. Capsaicin from chili does not raise the food's actual heat, yet it stimulates pathways associated with burning. Mustard and some strong vapors can create sharpness or sting in the same general way. These experiences show that flavor is broader than taste categories and aromas. Human sensing in the mouth is a layered event, blending taste, smell, touch, temperature, and chemical irritation. What people call spicy, cooling, fresh, or pungent often comes from this additional sensory channel, which gives food and drink some of their most vivid and memorable qualities. Perception takes time, yet the world usually feels immediate because the brain constantly predicts what is about to happen. Light and sound do not become conscious experience the instant they reach the receptors. Signals must travel, be processed, compared, and interpreted. Even so, people do not feel as though they are living a fraction behind reality. One reason is that the nervous system uses patterns from the recent past to estimate the present. Moving objects, familiar actions, and ongoing speech are handled partly through expectation. The brain is not waiting passively for a complete picture to arrive. It is making informed guesses that are usually close enough to feel seamless. This predictive style helps explain why perception is fast and practical rather than perfectly literal. Human senses are not delayed mirrors. They are active systems trying to stay in step with a changing world. Much of everyday smoothness depends on this quiet anticipation. The senses collect information over brief windows of time, and this helps turn separate events into continuous experience. A rapid series of still images can appear as smooth motion because the visual system blends information across small intervals rather than treating every frame as entirely isolated. Hearing works in a related way. Notes become melody, syllables become speech, and echoes can merge with the original sound depending on timing. This temporal integration allows the world to feel fluid instead of fragmented. Without it, speech might break into disconnected bursts, and motion might seem jerky or strangely brittle. Yet the windows are not so wide that everything blurs together. The nervous system balances continuity with separation, preserving pattern while still detecting change. Human senses are therefore not just about space, intensity, and quality. They are deeply shaped by time. The brain is always deciding what belongs together across a moment and what counts as something new. Body ownership is a constructed experience, and the brain builds it by combining sight, touch, and proprioception into a sense that the body belongs to the self. This usually feels so natural that it seems beyond question. A hand is simply one's own hand, yet experiments have shown that when visual and tactile signals are matched in carefully controlled ways, people can begin to feel a surprising connection to an artificial hand placed in view. The effect does not mean the brain is easily fooled in ordinary life. It means body ownership depends on sensory evidence being integrated into a coherent model. The brain asks what seems to move with me, what seems to be touched when I am touched, and what fits my internal map. Human senses do more than report objects in the world. They also help create the lived boundary of the self. The feeling of owning a body is not passive. It is actively maintained. Phantom limb experiences show that the brain's body maps can remain active even after a limb is gone. Some people who have lost an arm or leg continue to feel as though the missing part is still present, sometimes with clear sensations of posture, movement, warmth, or discomfort. This happens because sensation is not created by the limb alone. It also depends on how the brain represents the body and expects input from it. When ordinary signals stop, the established map may continue to generate experience. Over time, these experiences can change, and the nervous system may reorganize in different ways. The phenomenon reveals something profound about human senses. They are not simple wires running from body part to awareness. They are part of a larger interpretive system that builds a body image from memory, expectation, and ongoing input. Even absence can be sensed when the brain's long-held map has not entirely let go. Sensory thresholds are not fixed lines, but probabilities, because detection depends on both the signal and the surrounding conditions. A faint sound may be heard in a quiet bedroom, but missed on a busy street. A dim star may be visible after time in darkness, but not at first glance. Researchers often define thresholds as points where a stimulus is noticed some of the time, rather than all of the time. This reflects how real perception works. Receptors are noisy, attention shifts, and the brain weighs uncertain evidence before deciding whether something is present. Human senses are therefore not all or nothing devices. They are living systems operating near limits, constantly balancing sensitivity against false alarms. This flexibility is useful. If the brain demanded perfect certainty before noticing anything faint, much subtle information would be missed. Perception often begins as likelihood rather than proof, with the nervous system making its best decision from incomplete traces. Sensory memory holds very brief traces of experience, allowing the brain to compare moments that are close together in time. A visual trace may linger for an instant after the eyes move, and an auditory trace can remain long enough for separate sounds to be linked into words or melody. These stores are extremely short, yet they are crucial. Without them, perception would have less continuity, and the brain would struggle to connect what just happened with what is happening now. Echoic memory, the brief persistence of sound, helps a listener understand speech because the start of a sentence is still available when the end arrives. Iconic memory, the brief persistence of visual information. supports the flow of seeing during constant eye movements. Human senses do not present isolated points in time. They overlap slightly, and that overlap creates cohesion. Awareness feels continuous, partly because the recent past has not vanished the moment it occurs. Motion sickness often arises when the senses disagree about movement, especially when the inner ear and the eyes tell different stories. A passenger reading in a moving car may have eyes fixed on a steady page while the vestibular system detects acceleration and turning. On a ship, the cabin may appear still even as the body is being rocked by waves. The brain receives conflicting information about whether the person is moving, and for some people, this mismatch can lead to dizziness, unease, or nausea. The effect shows how closely the senses normally cooperate. Balance, vision, and proprioception usually confirm each other and create a stable sense of position in space. When they stop agreeing, the result can be deeply uncomfortable. Human perception depends not only on the accuracy of individual senses, but on their harmony. A calm internal sense of motion is often the product of several systems saying the same thing at once. Infants enter the world with functioning senses, but experience gradually tunes those senses to the patterns of their environment. Newborn vision is less sharp than adult vision, yet it is already drawn to contrast, movement, and faces. Hearing is active very early, and babies show sensitivity to voices and to rhythm even before speech is understood. Taste and smell also help guide feeding and recognition from the start. Over time, the sensory world becomes more specific. Repeated exposure shapes what sounds are easiest to distinguish, what faces are most familiar, and how touch and movement are coordinated with action. Development does not mean the senses switch on one by one from nothing. It means living systems refine themselves through use. Human sensation begins early, but it becomes more precise through relationship with the world. Perception grows by meeting light, sound, contact, and pattern again and again. Synesthesia is a rare blending of the senses in which stimulation in one domain consistently brings an extra experience in another. A person may see certain letters as having stable colors, feel that days of the week occupy fixed positions in space, or connect sounds with shapes or hues. These added impressions are not usually random decoration. For the people who experience them, they tend to be reliable over time, almost like a private layer of perception laid across the ordinary one. Synesthesia does not mean confusion about reality. Most synesthetes know perfectly well that a printed number is black ink on paper, even if it also carries a vivid internal color. The condition offers a gentle reminder that human senses are shaped not only by the world outside, but by the patterns the brain has learned to build within. Perception is not identical in every mind, and sometimes its variations are remarkably graceful. The pupils are small dark openings that quietly regulate how much light enters the eyes, adjusting without conscious effort through day and night. In bright conditions, they become smaller to limit incoming light and protect the retina from overload. In darkness, they widen to allow more light in, helping vision make better use of faint signals. This change is automatic and fast, yet it is only part of what pupils do. Their size can also shift with attention, effort, and emotional state, reflecting the broader activity of the nervous system. The pupils are therefore not just mechanical shutters. They are part of a living sensory system, responding to both the outside world and the inner condition of the observer. Much of this happens unnoticed. A person walks from sunlight into shade, and the eyes begin adjusting before any deliberate thought arises. Sensation often depends on these small hidden acts of regulation. Blinking is a simple movement that protects the eyes, refreshes the tear film, and briefly interrupts vision without making the world feel broken. Each blink spreads moisture across the cornea, helps clear away dust, and supports the smooth optical surface needed for sharp sight. Without blinking, vision would grow uncomfortable and less clear. Yet the most remarkable part is how little those interruptions are noticed. The eyelids close many times each minute, but perception remains continuous. The brain handles these brief losses of input so smoothly that they rarely enter awareness. In a sense, seeing includes regular moments of not seeing, gracefully managed by the nervous system. Blinking also changes with activity. People often blink less while reading or concentrating, and more during conversation or rest. Human vision depends not only on receiving light, but on protecting the tissues that receive it. Even a blink is part of the quiet craft of perception. Humans are born with an early preference for sweet taste, and that preference likely reflects the practical value of energy-rich foods in natural settings. Sweetness is commonly associated with sugars, which provide fuel the body can readily use. In infancy, sweet taste often has a calming effect, and across life it remains one of the most broadly liked taste qualities. This does not mean sweetness is always good in unlimited amounts, only that the nervous system seems prepared to welcome it. By contrast, some bitter substances can signal plant toxins, which may help explain why bitterness is more often met with caution. These tendencies are part of the old biological logic of taste. Human senses are not neutral measuring tools placed outside survival. They carry built-in leanings shaped by long history. Even a simple taste can contain an ancient message about nourishment, risk, and what the body may once have needed to seek. Bitterness is often detected at very low concentrations, which makes it one of the more protective parts of taste. Many naturally bitter compounds are harmless, and some are found in foods people come to enjoy, such as coffee, cocoa, and certain greens. Yet the strong sensitivity itself likely reflects a general warning function. Bitter taste may have helped ancestors avoid potentially dangerous substances before swallowing much of them. This does not mean every bitter flavor is a threat. Human food culture has long learned to value bitterness in measured ways, especially when it comes with aroma, balance, or preparation that makes it appealing. Still, the quick attention bitterness commands reveals something about the design of taste. It is not just a source of pleasure, it is a screening system. Among the human senses, taste shows particularly clearly how enjoyment and caution can share the same doorway, with the tongue offering both welcome and restraint. Umami is the savory taste linked to certain amino acids, especially glutamate, and it adds depth and fullness to many foods. It is often noticed in tomatoes, mushrooms, aged cheese, seaweed, meat broths, and slow-cooked dishes where proteins and other compounds create a rich mouth-filling quality. For a long time, people described this sensation without always treating it as a basic taste in its own right. Modern research has clarified that the tongue contains receptors responsive to umami-related substances, making it a genuine part of the taste system rather than a vague combination of saltiness and aroma. Umami is interesting because it often signals protein-rich or fermented foods, and can make flavors seem rounder and more satisfying. Human taste is sometimes simplified into sweet and salty favorites, but umami reveals a quieter complexity. The mouth is equipped not only to notice sharp contrasts, but also to appreciate depth, savoriness, and the subtle architecture of nourishment. Different parts of the skin vary greatly in spatial sensitivity, which is why fingertips can distinguish two nearby points more easily than the back or upper arm. This is often measured with a two-point discrimination test, where two touches are applied close together and the person reports whether they feel 1 point or 2. Regions used for detailed exploration, such as fingers and lips, usually perform far better than broader areas of the body. The difference comes from receptor density, smaller receptive fields, and the way the brain devotes more processing space to these important regions. Human touch is therefore uneven in a highly useful way. The body does not give equal detail everywhere, because equal detail is not needed everywhere. Fine sensitivity is concentrated where it helps most with grasping, speech, eating, and object recognition. The result is a body surface that is carefully tuned rather than uniform, with certain areas acting like especially attentive windows into the material world. Tools can become extensions of touch because the brain is able to use contact at the hand to infer events happening at a distance. A person using a walking stick can feel the difference between pavement, grass, and gravel through vibrations traveling up the shaft. Someone using a spoon can sense the thickness of soup or the resistance of a bowl without directly touching either. The body learns the behavior of the tool and begins treating it as part of a practical sensing system. This does not mean the tool becomes literally fused with the skin. It means the nervous system is flexible enough to include it in action and perception. Human touch is therefore not limited to bare fingers meeting a surface. Through use and familiarity, sensation can be projected outward into objects that carry information back. The hand remains the point of contact with the nervous system, but the field of exploration extends beyond the hand itself. Rubbing a bumped elbow or pressing a hand against a sore spot can sometimes soften discomfort because touch signals can influence how pain is processed. One influential explanation is often called gate control theory. In simple terms, strong input from certain touch fibers may help reduce the passage of pain-related signals through parts of the nervous system before they fully shape conscious experience. This does not erase injury, and it does not mean pain is easily overridden. It means sensory systems interact. A protective signal is being weighed alongside other information about contact and context. Everyday life offers many gentle examples. A person instinctively holds a stubbed toe, rubs a bruised knee, or presses a palm against an aching place. The body seems to know that touch can answer pain. Human senses are not isolated alerts sounding one at a time. They form networks that can moderate and influence one another in quiet, practical ways. Humans readily synchronize movement to rhythm, showing how hearing can guide the body even before deliberate thought catches up. Feet begin matching the pace of music. Hands find a beat on a table, and groups of people can fall into shared timing through sound alone. This ability depends on close links between auditory and motor systems. The brain is not merely hearing rhythm as an abstract pattern. It is preparing action, predicting the next beat, and aligning movement with expected timing. This may be one reason rhythmic sound feels so organizing. It gives the nervous system a structure to inhabit. speech also contains rhythm, and conversation depends partly on timing cues that help people take turns smoothly. Among human senses, hearing is especially strong at turning time into pattern. A beat can be followed, anticipated, and embodied. Sound does not only fill space, it can quietly arrange motion and make separate bodies move with shared order. Voices are among the most recognizable sounds in human life, and the brain treats them as a special class of auditory information. Long before the exact words are analyzed, listeners can often identify a familiar person by tone, timing, accent, and vocal texture. A voice carries clues about emotion, age, health, and identity all at once. Certain brain regions respond especially strongly to vocal sounds, suggesting that human hearing has become highly tuned to this socially important signal. Even brief speech can reveal who is speaking, whether they are calm or strained, near or far, attentive or distracted. This richness helps explain why hearing a known voice on the phone can feel immediately intimate, despite the narrow band of sound. Human senses are often at their most refined, where relationships matter. The ear does not simply decode language. It also listens for the person inside the sound, gathering character from breath, rhythm, and tone. Smelling is an active process because sniffing changes how odor molecules move into the nose and reach the receptors that detect them. A casual breath and a deliberate sniff are not the same sensory act. Sniffing can increase airflow, alter timing, and help the olfactory system gather a stronger or more detailed sample of what is in the air. This means smell is not purely passive reception. The body participates in shaping the input. Something similar happens in vision through eye movements and in touch through exploratory hand motions. Human senses often work best when they are used actively. The observer leans in, breathes in, turns toward, or runs fingers across a surface. Perception becomes a form of inquiry. A faint scent in a room may become identifiable only after one or two careful sniffs, as if the nose needs to ask again before the world reveals its answer. Even smell depends on small acts of investigation. The brain contains areas that are especially responsive to faces, reflecting how important face perception is in human life. A face can communicate identity, attention, age, mood, and intention with extraordinary speed. People often detect face-like patterns very readily, sometimes even in clouds, wood grain, or the front of a car. This tendency shows how prepared the visual system is to organize certain arrangements of eyes, nose, and mouth into a meaningful whole. Recognizing a face is not the same as cataloging separate features one by one. The brain is particularly good at perceiving the configuration, the relationship among parts, and how those parts change with expression. Human vision is therefore not equally tuned to every kind of object. It gives special importance to faces because faces matter so much in social life. Much of ordinary understanding begins there, with a glance that instantly carries recognition, emotion, and the sense of another mind nearby. The brain can sometimes restore missing pieces of speech, making a damaged sound stream feel more complete than it really is. If part of a spoken word is covered by a burst of noise, listeners may still report hearing the word clearly, as though the missing sound had been present all along. This effect is often called phonemic restoration. It reveals that hearing speech is not a passive act of receiving every acoustic detail exactly as delivered. Instead, the brain uses language knowledge, timing, and context to infer what most likely belonged in the gap. Usually, This helps rather than harms perception. In everyday settings, speech often arrives imperfectly through distance, echoes, traffic, or overlapping talk. Yet understanding remains possible. Human hearing is therefore deeply predictive and constructive. The ear gathers sound, but the brain helps finish the message. Language is heard not only through vibration, but through expectation guided by experience. Vibration is one of the most informative forms of touch, especially for the hands, which can detect fine differences in frequency and texture through movement. When a fingertip slides across paper, metal, wood, or fabric, tiny vibrations arise from the interaction between skin and surface. Specialized receptors respond to these patterns, helping the brain identify material qualities that would be hard to judge from steady pressure alone. This is one reason active touch is so revealing. A surface explored in motion speaks more clearly than a surface merely pressed. Vibration also carries information through tools and objects. A mechanic may feel a machine's irregularity through a handle, and a musician can sense resonance through an instrument. Human touch is often described as contact, but contact alone is only part of the story. Many textures become known through minute trembling events, too small to see, yet precise enough for the nervous system to read like a language of surfaces. Referred pain happens when discomfort is felt in a place different from its actual source, revealing that the brain interprets bodily signals through shared pathways and learned maps. One familiar example is pain from the heart, sometimes being felt in the chest, shoulder, arm, or jaw, rather than at a single neat point. The body is not trying to mislead. Instead, sensory inputs from internal organs and inputs from skin or muscle can converge in ways that make location harder to judge precisely. The brain then makes its best interpretation based on the patterns it knows. This is a reminder that inner sensation differs from outer touch. External contact can often be placed accurately on the skin, while signals from deeper structures may be broader, duller, or assigned to regions with overlapping connections. Human senses are skilled, but they are also inferential. Even discomfort is sometimes shaped by how the nervous system organizes meaning, rather than by source alone. The sound of food affects flavor because eating is partly heard as well as tasted, smelled, and felt. A crisp apple, a brittle cracker, or crackling toast seems different when its sound changes, even if the ingredients remain the same. Research has shown that crunch and freshness are linked in part through hearing, with louder or sharper sounds often making food seem crisper. This reveals something quietly fascinating about perception at the table. Flavor is not housed in the tongue alone. It is a multisensory event shaped by aroma, texture, temperature, and the small noises made during chewing. A silent crispness would not feel quite the same. Human senses therefore collaborate even in ordinary meals. The ear contributes to judgments that seem, at first glance, to belong entirely to the mouth. Eating is not only chemistry and taste buds. It is also sound, expectation, and the physical music of breaking surfaces. The brain contains organized sensory maps in which neighboring body parts or sensory values are often represented in neighboring neural areas. In the touch system, for example, the body is laid out across regions of the cortex in an orderly pattern, sometimes illustrated as a distorted human figure, with oversized lips and hands reflecting their greater sensitivity. Vision also has mapped organization, preserving relationships from the retina, and hearing arranges frequencies in systematic ways. These maps are not simple pictures stored in miniature. They are working layouts that help the brain process patterns efficiently. Human senses depend not only on receptors in the body, but on structured space within the brain itself. The world and the body are echoed in neural geography. This arrangement helps explain why practice, injury, or sensory change can alter function over time. Perception is supported by living maps, shaped by use, and quietly active whenever sight, sound, or touch becomes experience. Smell is strongly linked to appetite because odors can prepare the body for food even before the first bite is taken. The aroma of bread, soup, fruit, or roasted spices often begins shaping expectation at a distance, drawing attention and sometimes increasing salivation. This anticipatory role is practical. Smell allows evaluation before swallowing, offering clues about ripeness, spoilage, richness, or familiarity. It can make food inviting, but it can also warn against something turned sour or chemically unusual. In this way, the nose acts as an early sensory gatekeeper for eating. Much of flavor begins before the tongue is involved at all. Human senses often work in sequence, with one preparing the way for another. A meal is first encountered in the air, then in the mouth. The quiet power of aroma lies in this early access. It reaches ahead of contact and starts building the experience while the food is still approaching. Taste sensitivity can shift with context, hunger, health, and recent exposure, which means flavor is not experienced in exactly the same way from moment to moment. Something slightly sweet may stand out more after a period without food, while repeated bites of the same dish can seem less intense over time. Temperature can change how flavors unfold, and fatigue, illness, or nasal congestion can alter the balance dramatically. These changes do not mean taste is unreliable. They show that it is a living sense integrated with the state of the body. The mouth does not sample food from a neutral laboratory position. It samples from within a person who is hungry or full, rested or tired, healthy or unwell. Human senses are often described as windows, but they are also participants. The condition of the observer matters. Even the flavor of something familiar may shift because the body meeting it is not quite the same as yesterday. The vestibular system helps stabilize vision during movement by driving a reflex that moves the eyes in the opposite direction of the head. If the head turns to the left, the eyes quickly shift to the right just enough to keep the point of gaze relatively steady. This is called the vestibulo-ocular reflex, and it works so fast that people rarely notice it happening. Without it, walking, running, or simply looking around would smear the visual scene much more than it does. The world stays surprisingly stable, not because the head stays still, but because the eyes are constantly being corrected. This reflex is one of the clearest examples of cooperation among the senses. Balance organs in the inner ear detect motion, and vision benefits immediately. Human perception is filled with these hidden partnerships. The eye may seem to do the seeing alone, but much of its steadiness depends on signals arriving from deep within the ear. Attention changes what the senses notice, not by creating new signals, but by selecting which signals matter most at a given moment. In a busy room, a person can suddenly become aware of a distant conversation after hearing their name. While reading, they may fail to notice a quiet sound until the mind relaxes its focus on the page. Attention does not replace sensation, yet it shapes the doorway through which sensation reaches awareness. The brain is constantly filtering more input than it can fully examine at once, and attention is one of the tools it uses to allocate resources. This is why the same environment can feel rich or nearly absent depending on what a person is doing. Human senses provide possibility, but attention helps decide what becomes experience in the foreground. Perception is never just the world pressing inward. It is also the mind leaning towards some things and softly away from others. Practice can sharpen sensory discrimination, showing that perception can become more precise through repeated experience. A musician may learn to hear subtle tuning differences that others miss. A tea taster or perfumer may develop a vocabulary and sensitivity for aromas that once seemed indistinct. A craftsperson handling wood, fabric, or metal may feel fine textural differences with growing ease. This improvement does not usually come from acquiring entirely new receptors. It comes from training attention, memory, categorization, and the brain's interpretation of recurring patterns. The sensory world becomes more detailed because the observer becomes more skilled at noticing what is already there. Human senses are therefore not fixed limits in a simple sense. They are capacities that can be refined. The world can seem to gain new layers when practice teaches the nervous system where to look, what to compare, and how to hold subtle differences long enough for them to become clear. Human senses do not all update at the same speed, and the brain must constantly align signals that arrive on slightly different timelines. Light, sound, touch, and body signals travel through different receptors and pathways, each with its own delays and processing demands. Yet the world usually feels synchronized. A person sees a hand clap and hears the sound as one event, even though the underlying neural processing is not perfectly simultaneous. The brain solves this by using timing windows and learned expectations to bind related signals together. It allows a little flexibility so that small mismatches do not break experience apart. This is especially useful in daily life, where distance, echoes, and movement often separate sensory cues by tiny amounts. Human perception feels coherent because it is tolerant as well as precise. The senses are not forced into rigid exactness. They are gently coordinated into practical agreement, so separate channels can still describe one shared moment. The nose is well designed for detecting change in the air, which is one reason a new smell entering a room can seem striking at first, and then quickly fade into the background. This happens partly because olfactory receptors and brain circuits adapt when an odor remains steady. The system seems especially interested in novelty, shifts, and contrast, which makes sense for a sense that often works as an early warning or guide. A fresh scent may signal food, weather, smoke, animals, plants, or people nearby. Once the odor becomes familiar and unchanging, constant attention to it would be less useful. Human smell is therefore less like a continuous meter and more like a detector of arrival and difference. The world's chemistry is always present, but what the nose highlights most often is what has just changed. This gives smell a subtle atmospheric quality. It can transform a place in an instant, then settle back into quiet. The tongue does not have strict taste zones where one region senses only sweet and another senses only bitter. Despite the popularity of that old classroom image, in reality, taste buds containing receptors for different taste qualities are distributed more broadly across the tongue and nearby areas of the mouth. Some regions may vary slightly in sensitivity, but the neat map dividing the tongue into isolated districts is not an accurate description of how taste works. This matters because it shows the taste system is more integrated and flexible than the myth suggests. Human taste is not a patchwork of tiny separate kingdoms. It is a cooperative surface where multiple qualities can be sampled across many points of contact. A sip of tea or a bite of fruit engages a more distributed sensory field than the old chart implies. Even familiar body maps can become gentler and more interesting when they are understood more accurately. Hearing can continue to make sense of sound even when part of the frequency range is missing, because the brain uses pattern and context to reconstruct what is most likely there. Telephones, for example, do not carry the full richness of a live human voice. Much of the lowest and highest frequency content is reduced, yet speech often remains clear enough for recognition and conversation. This is possible because language contains redundancy, and the auditory system is skilled at extracting useful cues from incomplete signals. Rhythm, timing, vowel structure, consonant bursts, and familiar voice patterns all help fill the gaps. Human hearing does not require perfect acoustic detail to produce meaningful understanding. It is built for practical success in the real world, where sound is often shaped by walls, weather, noise, distance, or machines. Even an imperfect channel can carry a remarkable amount of presence when the ear and brain are ready to assemble the fragments. The eyes are most sensitive to different kinds of visual information depending on conditions, which means the same scene can reveal different features in bright light and in darkness. In strong daylight, fine detail and color become prominent because cone-based vision is doing much of the work. In dim light, rods take on a greater role, and the world shifts towards shape, contrast, and motion rather than rich color. This change affects how landscapes feel at dusk. Bright flowers may lose their vivid tones, while outlines of trees and movement near the edges of vision remain noticeable. Human sight is not a single fixed mode. It quietly changes strategy depending on what the environment allows. Perception remains useful by emphasizing different strengths under different conditions. The world seen at noon and the world seen by moonlight are not simply brighter and darker versions of the same picture. They are slightly different sensory experiences built by the same adaptable system. Pressure receptors in the skin respond differently depending on the kind of contact, which helps the body distinguish steady holding from fluttering, tapping, or deep sustained pressure. Some receptors are especially good at noticing changes, such as the beginning and end of contact or fine vibration. Others continue responding during longer pressure and help describe shape and form against the skin. Because of this variety, the hand can tell whether an object is resting in the palm, slipping at the edges, or trembling slightly. The body does not need one universal touch signal. It uses multiple specialized channels that together make contact more informative. Human touch feels simple only because its complexity is hidden. Underneath a single grasp, the nervous system is tracking onset, duration, texture, force, and movement all at once. The practical elegance of touch lies in this layered sensitivity, where different receptors each contribute a separate part of the story. The human ear is especially sensitive to frequencies important for speech, reflecting how central spoken communication has been in daily life. Although hearing covers a broad range, sensitivity is not equal across all pitches. The auditory system tends to perform especially well in the middle ranges, where many speech sounds carry their most useful information. This makes practical sense. A person need not hear every frequency with identical power. If the system is tuned to those most relevant for understanding voices, warnings, and social exchange. The shape of the ear canal and the mechanics of the middle and inner ear also contribute to this uneven sensitivity. Human hearing is therefore not flat or neutral. It is shaped by usefulness. The ear has been organized not only to detect sound in general, but to serve the special acoustic patterns that matter most in ordinary human environments. Even its quietest strengths point toward conversation and connection. Fat perception in food is not a classical basic taste in the same settled way as sweet or bitter, but the mouth clearly responds to fat through a rich blend of sensory channels. Texture plays a major role. Creaminess, smoothness, coating, and body are felt through touch in the mouth, while aroma adds depth and taste may contribute indirectly depending on the food. Researchers have also investigated whether certain fatty acids may be detected more directly by specialized mechanisms, though the full story is still more nuanced than the older basic taste categories. What matters for ordinary experience is that fat changes flavor profoundly. It carries aroma, softens harshness, spreads across surfaces, and creates a sense of fullness that the mouth and brain notice readily. Human eating is not governed by taste alone. It is shaped by a broad sensory economy in which texture, smell, and internal signals about richness all help define what feels satisfying. The eyes can follow a moving object smoothly, and this ability is different from the quick jumps used to scan a scene. When watching a bird cross the sky or a ball travel through the air, the visual system can use smooth pursuit movements to keep the image near the center of the retina. This allows the object to stay clearer while the background moves across the visual field. By contrast, scanning a room or reading a page relies more on rapid jumps called saccades. Human vision, therefore, has more than one style of movement, each suited to a different task. Smooth pursuit is especially useful for tracking predictable motion, while rapid shifts help sample different points of interest. These eye movements are usually effortless and unconscious, yet they are part of why the visible world feels navigable and alive. Even following motion turns out to be an active skill, not just a passive consequence of looking. Sound can reveal the size and character of a space through echoes, reverberation, and subtle changes in tone. A whisper in a small carpeted room behaves differently from a voice in a stone hall or beneath a bridge. Hard surfaces reflect sound more strongly, soft materials absorb more of it, and the timing of returning echoes helps the brain infer volume and shape. People may not consciously calculate these cues, yet they often sense them immediately. A place can sound close, open, hollow, crowded, or intimate before it is fully examined with the eyes. Human hearing is therefore partly architectural. It does not only report the sound source, it also reports the way the surrounding world receives and reshapes that sound. This is one reason familiar rooms can feel so distinct even with the lights off. The ear hears not only objects and voices, but the shape of air within walls and the quiet signature of space itself. The skin can notice the direction of a moving touch, which helps the brain interpret contact as dynamic rather than static. When something glides across the forearm or a fingertip traces a line over cloth, receptors are activated in a sequence over time. The nervous system uses that sequence to infer motion, speed, and direction. This adds an important layer to touch. The skin is not only reporting where contact happened, but also how it traveled. Such information helps identify crawling insects, slipping objects, brushing fabric, and the movement of another hand across the body. Human touch often depends on time as much as space. A pattern unfolding across the skin can mean far more than a single point of pressure. Motion gives contact narrative. It turns a simple touch into an event, allowing the body to sense not just presence, but trajectory, pace, and the difference between stillness and approach. The smell of a food contributes strongly to what people call taste, especially through retronasal olfaction, the path from the mouth to the nose during chewing and swallowing. While eating, volatile molecules rise from the warm food and travel upward into the nasal cavity from behind. This activates the olfactory system in a way that blends seamlessly with signals from taste buds and texture receptors. Because the root is internal, many people do not realize smell is playing such a large part. The flavor simply seems to happen in the mouth. Yet this hidden contribution is why food becomes much less interesting when the nose is blocked. Human flavor perception is therefore partly an illusion of location. The aroma is often registered in the nose, but experienced as though it belongs to the food on the tongue. The senses cooperate so closely that separate channels fuse into one edible impression without announcing how they shared the work. The body can sense acceleration as distinct from constant speed, which is why starting, stopping, and turning are felt more clearly than steady motion. The vestibular system in the inner ear is particularly tuned to changes in movement. When a car pulls away, a train slows, or a bicycle leans into a curve. Those changes create forces that move fluid and tiny structures inside the balance organs. Once motion becomes smooth and constant, those signals may lessen, which is one reason a very steady ride can begin to feel almost motionless. Human balance is especially concerned with transition. The body notices change in speed and direction because such changes often require adjustment. This makes practical sense. A nervous system that tracked only position would be less helpful than one that can quickly detect shifting motion. Sensation is often organized around what is changing, and the vestibular system expresses that principle with unusual clarity. People can often identify common objects by touch alone, a skill known as stereognosis, which shows how richly touch can represent form. A key, coin, spoon, or folded paperclip may be recognized in a pocket without being seen. This depends on several things working together. Intact touch sensation, the ability to move the fingers around the object, and previous familiarity with its shape and use. The hand gathers edges, curves, weight, texture, and relative proportions, while the brain compares those features with stored knowledge. Human touch is therefore not merely local sensation. It can support full object recognition. This is especially striking because the information arrives piece by piece as the fingers explore, not all at once like a photograph. Yet the mind quickly assembles the parts into a whole. The result feels immediate and ordinary, though it reflects a remarkably sophisticated dialogue between sensation, movement, and memory. The visual system is highly skilled at detecting biological motion, meaning the characteristic movement patterns of living bodies. Even when people are shown only a few moving points of light attached to a person's joints in darkness, they can often tell almost instantly that the pattern is a walking human. They may even infer direction, mood, or action from the motion alone. This reveals how sensitive the brain is to the timing and structure of natural body movement. Human vision is not only tuned to static shapes, it is deeply responsive to the way living things move through space. This likely carries practical value for social perception, cooperation, and awareness of others. A body can be recognized from motion before facial detail or clothing is clear. Sometimes movement is identity enough. The senses often seem calmest when they are most efficient, and this is one of their quiet efficiencies. Life can be seen in motion almost before it is seen in form. The ear protects itself from excessive input, in part through small muscles in the middle ear that can reduce the transmission of sound energy under certain conditions. This response, often called the acoustic reflex, does not block loud sound completely and is not fast enough to protect well against sudden explosive noise. Even so, it reflects an important principle. The hearing system is not a passive funnel. It includes mechanisms that adjust and defend. The reflex can also be triggered during vocalization, slightly changing how the ear handles self-generated sound. This may help balance sensitivity to the outside world with the need to speak without overwhelming one's own hearing. Human senses are full of this kind of quiet self-management. They are not only open to the environment, they are constantly regulating how that openness is handled. Even hearing includes small built-in acts of moderation, hidden within the machinery of everyday listening. The surface of the eye must remain smooth and properly hydrated for vision to stay clear, which makes tears an important part of seeing, rather than just a response to emotion. The tear film coats the cornea and helps create a stable optical surface through which light can pass cleanly. It also protects against dryness, nourishes exposed tissues, and helps wash away small particles. When this thin film is disrupted, vision may become blurry or uncomfortable, even if the deeper structures of the eye are healthy. Human sight depends on more than retina and brain. It begins at the eye's front surface, where moisture and clarity are quietly maintained. Tears, therefore, belong to ordinary optics as much as to feeling. Most of the time they work invisibly, without drama or notice. Yet every sharp image depends in part on that delicate liquid layer, constantly refreshed so that light can enter cleanly. Touch can help shape hearing because vibrations reaching the body can reinforce the sense of rhythm, impact, and presence in sound. A low drumbeat felt through the floor or the chest is not heard by the ears alone. The body participates, especially for lower frequencies that are as much felt as heard. This contributes to the physical quality of music, engines, thunder, and other powerful sound sources. Human senses often overlap most clearly at the edges, where one kind of stimulus is strong enough to spill into another channel. Vibration bridges touch and hearing in a natural way. It makes sound feel embodied. A concert, for instance, is not only an auditory event, but a tactile one, with pulses traveling through air and surfaces into the skin and tissues. The distinction between hearing and feeling becomes less sharp. The world's vibrations arrive through more than one doorway, and perception deepens when those doorways open together. The ability to judge the rough weight of an object begins the moment it is lifted, because the nervous system uses touch, proprioception, and expectation together. As the fingers close and the arm begins to raise, receptors in muscles and tendons report effort, while the skin reports pressure and friction. The brain compares these signals with prior experience and rapidly updates how heavy the object seems. This process is so quick that people usually notice weight as an immediate property, not as a conclusion slowly reasoned out. Even slight mismatches between expectation and actual mass can feel surprising, such as when lifting an empty box that looks full. Human senses are not only measuring the world in real time, they are also comparing reality with prediction. Weight perception is a fine example of this partnership. The body senses force directly, but meaning emerges through the meeting of current input and the memory of what was expected. The nose can influence social perception in subtle ways because body odors carry information shaped by hygiene, environment, food, health, and individual chemistry. Much of this operates below the level of detailed conscious analysis. A person may simply seem familiar, fresh, sharp, comforting, or unpleasant without being able to name the exact source. In humans, smell does not function through dramatic scent signals in the way sometimes imagined for other animals, but it still contributes quietly to social awareness. Infants can recognize caregivers partly through smell, and adults often associate certain people or places with distinctive but hard to describe scent impressions. Human senses frequently work through background pattern as much as foreground notice. The nose is one of the best examples. It can shape atmosphere, recognition, and comfort without demanding attention. Even in highly visual societies, subtle chemistry in the air still participates in how people encounter one another. Hunger can sharpen attention to food-related cues, showing how internal state changes the way outside sensory information is prioritized. The smell of cooking, the sight of fruit, or the sound of a kitchen may become more noticeable when the body needs energy. This does not mean the senses suddenly acquire new powers. Instead, the brain adjusts salience, giving more value to certain signals because they are currently relevant. A full person and a hungry person may walk through the same market, but experience it somewhat differently. Human perception is always tied to need. The external world is not sensed in a perfectly neutral way. Internal signals about energy, thirst, fatigue, or safety help tune what stands out. This makes the senses efficient rather than detached. They are not only windows onto what is there, they are guides to what matters now, shaped by the quiet requirements of the body. Smell and memory often seem closely linked because olfactory pathways connect relatively directly with brain systems involved in emotion and recollection. A familiar scent can awaken a place, season, or phase of life with unusual speed, sometimes before the person has named either the smell or the memory it evokes. The effect is not magical, and it is not unique to smell alone, but it can feel especially vivid in this sensory domain. Odors are often encountered in particular settings and are less easily described in words than sights or sounds, which may help preserve their strong ties to experience. Human senses each leave traces in memory, yet smell often arrives with a distinctive immediacy. A room, a person, a landscape, or a moment can seem to return through the air itself. The smallest molecules can carry not only scent, but time, place, and the feeling of something once quietly known. Human sensation is always partly selective, and this selectivity is what allows the world to remain clear rather than overwhelming. The eyes do not report every photon equally. The ears do not hold all sounds in the foreground. The skin does not keep every pressure vivid, and the nose does not endlessly repeat the same odor at full strength. Adaptation, attention, prediction, and contrast will help shape experience into something useful. This means perception is not a perfect copy of reality, but it is often wiser than a perfect copy would be. A truly complete report of everything at once might be impossible to live with. Instead, the senses offer a filtered world, one organized around change, relevance, and action. Human sensing is therefore both limited and elegant. Its quiet genius lies not in capturing all possible detail, but in presenting just enough of the right detail for the living moment. Braille reading shows that touch can become a highly precise form of literacy when the fingers are trained to detect tiny raised patterns. The system uses combinations of small embossed dots arranged within compact cells, and skilled readers identify these patterns through light finger movement rather than heavy pressure. What matters is not simple contact alone, but active exploration. The fingertips glide, the skin picks up minute differences, and the brain rapidly converts those patterns into letters, words, and meaning. This relies on the unusual sensitivity of the fingers and on practice that makes tactile distinctions feel increasingly natural. For experienced readers, Braille is not a slow puzzle, assembled one dot at a time. It becomes a fluent sensory language carried through the skin. Human touch is often treated as secondary to sight for reading, yet Braille reveals a different possibility. With training and fine sensation, the hand can become a doorway to language, memory, and thought. Tickling depends strongly on surprise and unpredictability, which is why people are usually much less ticklish when they try to tickle themselves. The skin still receives contact, but the brain has already predicted the timing, force, and location of that touch. So the sensation loses much of the effect it would have if caused by someone else. This reveals something subtle about human senses. Perception is shaped not only by incoming signals, but by expectation built from movement and intention. When the nervous system accurately forecasts the result of one's own action, it can reduce the sensory response. That helps separate self-generated events from outside ones, making the world easier to interpret. A brush against the ribs from another person feels different from the same motion produced by one's own hand. Tickling is therefore not just a matter of where the skin is touched. It depends on uncertainty, timing, and the brain's quiet model of what it caused. Sensory substitution shows that the brain can learn to gather useful spatial information through an unexpected channel, such as touch or sound standing in for vision. Some devices convert camera images into vibrations on the skin or into changing patterns of sound. With practice, users may begin to interpret those signals as information about shape, position, and layout, rather than as meaningless pulses or tones. This does not mean touch literally becomes sight, or that sound stops being sound. It means the brain can learn a new code and use it for navigation or recognition. The result is a powerful example of flexibility in human senses. Perception depends not only on what receptors detect, but on how the brain learns to organize that information into something useful. A vibrating pattern on the back or a shifting sound in headphones can gradually come to represent doors, edges, or approaching objects. The nervous system is more adaptable than the familiar senses alone might suggest. Many people naturally connect certain sounds with certain shapes, suggesting that the senses share quiet patterns of association even without formal training. A famous example compares a soft-sounding word like booba with a rounded shape, and a sharper-sounding word like kiki with an angular one. Across languages and cultures, many participants make the same match. The effect does not prove that sounds literally contain shape, but it suggests that the brain links sensory qualities in systematic ways. Rounded sounds seem to fit rounded forms, while abrupt sounds seem to fit pointed ones. Human senses are often described as separate streams, yet this kind of cross-modal correspondence hints at a deeper harmony. The mind seems ready to pair certain auditory textures with visual or tactile character. Such pairings may help with language, symbolism, and intuitive meaning. Even very simple sounds can feel as though they already lean toward a certain kind of form before any explanation is given. Size constancy allows objects to seem roughly stable in size, even though their images on the retina grow and shrink dramatically with distance. A friend walking away does not appear to become toy-sized, and a house in the distance is still understood as a full house rather than a miniature. The visual system manages this by combining retinal image size with context, depth cues, and prior knowledge about the world. Distance matters to interpretation. A small image nearby may mean a small object, while the same image farther away may represent something much larger. This correction happens so smoothly that people rarely notice how much inferential work vision is doing. Human sight does not simply read image size from the eye and stop there. It adjusts that information using the sensed-up structure of space. The result is a world that feels solid and dependable. Objects keep their apparent scale because the brain quietly factors distance into every ordinary glance. Prism adaptation shows that the senses and movements can recalibrate when vision is shifted away from its usual alignment. If a person wears prism glasses that displace the visual world to one side, their first reaches and pointing movements often miss the target. After repeated attempts, however, the nervous system adjusts. The hand begins to land more accurately, even though the visual shift remains. When the prisms are removed, the person may briefly err in the opposite direction, revealing that a real recalibration has taken place. This is a gentle but powerful demonstration that perception and action are not fixed once and for all. The brain keeps comparing what was expected with what actually happened, then updates the system accordingly. Human senses are therefore deeply tied to learning. Seeing, reaching, and body position are constantly being coordinated. Even when the world is displaced artificially, the nervous system works patiently to restore order between eye, hand, and space. Auditory masking happens when one sound makes another harder to hear, especially if the two are close in pitch or occur close together in time. A soft tone may vanish beneath a louder nearby frequency, and a brief sound can become difficult to detect if it is preceded or followed closely by another stronger one. This is not simply because the quieter sound failed to reach the ear. It may arrive perfectly well, yet the nervous system struggles to separate it from the competing signal. Human hearing is selective, and that selectivity has limits. In ordinary life, masking shapes much of what people notice. Traffic can bury birdsong, ventilation can soften speech, and one instrument in music can obscure another. The ear is always sorting, but some sounds win the competition for clarity. Auditory masking is one reason quiet details can disappear in busy environments. Hearing depends not only on what is present, but on what else is present at the same moment. Temperature can change flavor perception, which is one reason the same food may seem sweeter, duller, sharper, or more aromatic depending on how warm or cool it is. Ice cream eaten slightly melted may reveal more aroma than when deeply frozen, while warm bread releases scent molecules more readily than cold bread. Sweetness itself can seem stronger at some temperatures, and bitterness or acidity may stand out differently as warmth changes. Part of this comes from taste receptors, part from smell, and part from texture. Cold can mute aroma and alter mouthfeel, while warmth can lift volatile compounds into the nose and change how quickly flavor spreads. Human eating is therefore closely tied to temperature, even when no one is consciously thinking about it. A dish is not sensed only by its ingredients. It is sensed through its physical state in that moment. Warmth and coolness quietly reshape how the tongue and nose understand the same food. The motion after effect makes a still scene seem to drift after the eyes have watched movement in one direction for a while. A classic example appears after looking steadily at flowing water or a rotating pattern. When the gaze then shifts to a stationary surface, that surface may briefly appear to move the other way. The effect is temporary and harmless, but it reveals something important about visual processing. Cells tuned to certain directions of motion adapt during prolonged viewing, altering the balance of activity when the motion stops. Human sight is therefore not just recording movement out in the world. It is also shaped by the recent history of stimulation within the visual system itself. A waterfall can leave a trace that lingers for a moment on the rocks beside it. Perception is not only about what is present right now. It is also influenced by what the senses have just been doing and how those systems have adjusted in response. Afterimages reveal that color vision depends on opponent processes, with some visual channels balancing pairs such as red against green and blue against yellow. If a person stares at a strong color for a time and then looks at a plain white or pale surface, a ghostly image in complementary colors may appear. A bright red patch may leave a greenish afterimage, for example. This happens because prolonged stimulation temporarily shifts the balance of the visual system, so the neutral background is seen through that altered state. The effect is brief, yet it offers a clear window into how the eye and brain construct color, rather than merely receive it. Human vision is an active system of comparison. Colors are interpreted in relation to other colors and to the recent past. A blank wall can suddenly bloom with a color that is not physically there, simply because the visual machinery is recalibrating after sustained stimulation. Some blind people use echolocation by making small mouth clicks and listening to the returning echoes, turning sound into a practical guide to space. The clicks bounce off walls, doorways, parked cars, trees, and other surfaces, and the reflected sound carries information about distance, size, and position. With training, a listener can learn to detect patterns in those echoes and move with impressive awareness through an environment. This does not replace all the detail of sight, but it shows that human hearing can do more spatial work than many people imagine. The world does not only announce itself through light, it also answers back through sound when sound is sent into it. Echolocation is a striking example of active perception. The person creates the signal, listens for the return, and builds a sense of layout from the result. Hearing becomes a form of probing space, almost like touching the world at a distance with brief pulses of sound. The fingers adjust grip force with remarkable speed when an object begins to slip, preventing drops before conscious thought usually arrives. When a cup shifts slightly in the hand, receptors in the skin detect tiny changes in friction and movement almost immediately. The nervous system responds by increasing force, just enough to stabilize the object, often within fractions of a second. This is one reason daily handling feels so effortless. People do not usually calculate how hard to hold each thing after the initial lift. The hand keeps updating itself. Human touch is therefore closely linked with action, not just sensation. The skin senses small signs of instability, muscles respond, and the object remains secure. This fine control also explains why slippery surfaces, gloves, or numbness make objects feel harder to manage. Grip depends on feedback. The hand is not only grasping, it is listening through the skin for the slightest hint that the object is beginning to move away. Smell helps detect food spoilage because decaying foods release changing mixtures of volatile compounds that the nose can notice before the eye sees obvious damage. Sourness in milk, sulfur notes in rotting eggs, or the stale sharpness of spoiled meat are not random impressions. They reflect chemical changes produced by microbes and by the breakdown of tissues over time. The olfactory system is not a laboratory instrument that identifies every substance precisely, yet it is often good enough to warn that something has shifted from fresh to risky. This makes smell one of the body's earliest gatekeepers around eating. Human senses do not wait until food is swallowed to make a judgment. They begin evaluating it at a distance. The nose often provides the first caution, sometimes supported by sight or taste, sometimes before either of those has fully weighed in. A brief odor can carry a practical message about time, decay, and whether a meal still belongs on the table. The image formed on the retina is upside down and reversed left to right. Yet perception is not experienced as an upside-down picture that the brain must literally flip. Light passing through the lens is focused in that inverted way because of basic optics, but the visual system does not work by first producing a tiny conscious photograph and then rotating it like a paper print. Instead, the brain learns stable relationships between retinal input, body movement, gravity, touch, and the structure of the world. Upright perception emerges from coordinated interpretation rather than from a simple mechanical correction. This is why the old question about how the brain turns the image over is slightly misleading. Human vision is not about viewing a picture inside the head. It is about using pattern signals to guide action and understanding. The orientation of the retinal image matters to biology, yet what people actually experience is shaped by the brain's learned grasp of space, body, and environment. Shining light into one eye causes both pupils to become smaller, showing how the visual system coordinates the two eyes, even at a basic reflex level. This is called the consensual pupillary response. The eye receiving the light reacts, but the other eye reacts as well, because the controlling circuits share information across the brainstem. The result helps keep vision balanced and protects both retinas from sudden excess brightness. Most people never notice this partnership because the response is automatic and quick. Yet it is a lovely example of how sensory systems are built for coordination, rather than strict independence. The eyes may look separate from the outside, but they are managed as a pair in many essential ways. Human sight depends on these hidden acts of cooperation. Light arriving on one side can lead to change on both sides, creating smoother adaptation and a more stable visual world than two completely isolated eyes could provide. Sudden loud sounds can trigger a startle response that sweeps through the body in an instant, linking hearing to posture, blinking, and muscle tension. The effect is fast, often arriving before a person has consciously identified what made the noise. Shoulders may lift, the neck may tighten, the eyes may blink, and attention snaps toward the event. This reaction is protective. The body is preparing for the possibility that something important has just happened nearby. Human senses are not only routes for detailed analysis. Some are also built to provoke whole-body readiness, when speed matters more than fine interpretation. The startle response shows how quickly sound can move from ear to action. A slammed door, sudden clap, or sharp crack can reorganize the body almost at once. Long after the sound is understood to be harmless, the response itself may already have passed, leaving behind a brief reminder that hearing is closely tied to rapid protective movement. Vision can dominate where a sound seems to come from, which is why a ventriloquist's voice appears to emerge from a puppet, even though the real source is elsewhere. The ears still receive the sound from the performer, but the eyes provide a strong and persuasive cue. When lip movements or other visual events match the timing of speech, the brain often decides that the visible source is the correct one. This is usually a practical strategy rather than an error. In everyday life, sight often gives very reliable information about location, and combining it with sound improves overall judgment. The ventriloquism effect simply reveals the weighting of that partnership. Human senses do not vote equally in every situation. Depending on context, one channel may guide the final perception more strongly than another. A moving mouth has powerful influence over heard speech. The sound reaches the ears, but the eyes help decide where in space that sound belongs. Taste qualities interact with each other, which means sweetness, bitterness, sourness, saltiness, and savoriness are not always experienced as separate voices speaking at full volume. Sugar can soften the harshness of bitterness or acidity. Salt can reduce some bitter notes and make other flavors seem fuller. Acidity can brighten sweetness, while strong bitterness can suppress more delicate tastes. These effects are part of why recipes feel balanced or unbalanced, rather than simply intense or weak. Human flavor perception is relational. The mouth is not reading each component in isolation and adding them like numbers. It is experiencing a dynamic mixture in which one element can reshape the impact of another. This interaction helps explain why a pinch of salt improves caramel, why lemon can sharpen a dish, and why bitterness in coffee changes when sweetness is added. Taste becomes most interesting when qualities meet. The final flavor is often less like a list and more like an agreement among competing sensations. Visual flow helps guide walking and balance, because the pattern of movement across the eyes tells the brain how the body is moving through space. As a person walks forward, the scene seems to stream outward from a central point. Nearer objects slide faster across the visual field than distant ones, and this changing pattern provides constant information about speed, direction, and approach. The body combines that visual flow with signals from the inner ear and from muscles and joints. Together, they help maintain posture and stable motion. Human balance is therefore not based only on the vestibular system. The eyes are deeply involved. A wide open hallway, a descending staircase, or a moving crowd all create visual patterns that the brain uses to adjust step by step. Much of ordinary locomotion depends on this quiet river of visual change. The world moving past the eyes is not just scenery. It is guidance for the body in motion. The nasal cycle is a natural rhythm in which airflow shifts between the two nostrils over the course of several hours, even in healthy breathing. One side often allows a little more air through, while the other is slightly more congested, and later the pattern reverses. Most people do not notice it unless they pay close attention or have a cold that makes the difference more obvious. The cycle is regulated by the autonomic nervous system and involves changes in blood flow to tissues inside the nose. It does not mean one nostril turns off completely. It is more like a quiet alternation of emphasis. Human smell and breathing therefore unfold through a subtly changing physical gateway, rather than a perfectly fixed one. This gentle rhythm may help the nose manage moisture, filtration, and airflow conditions. Even breathing through the nose contains hidden variation. The body keeps adjusting its own passageways with a patience so steady that it usually passes unnoticed. Saccadic suppression is the quiet process that keeps the world from seeming smeared every time the eyes jump from one point to another. Human eyes make rapid shifts called saccades many times each second while reading, scanning a room, or looking from face to face. During those brief movements, the image on the retina changes very quickly and would create strong blur if it were experienced in full detail. Instead, the visual system reduces awareness of that blur around the time of the eye movement. The result is a scene that feels stable and clean rather than shaky. This is one reason people do not notice their own eyes darting about, even though the movements are constant. Human vision depends not only on gathering light, but on carefully editing what reaches awareness. Seeing clearly sometimes means not noticing part of the raw input, and this hidden silence around each eye movement helps the visible world remain calm. Change blindness shows that people can miss even obvious visual changes when attention is directed elsewhere. A large object may disappear from a scene, a shirt color may switch, or a person may change places during a brief interruption, yet the viewer may not notice at all. This does not mean the eyes failed to receive the image. It means the brain did not fully compare the old and new details because attention was occupied. Human vision often feels broad and complete, as though everything in front of us is equally available at once. In practice, awareness is selective. The mind samples, prioritizes, and builds a useful version of the scene rather than preserving every detail with equal care. Change blindness is a gentle reminder that seeing is an active achievement, not a passive recording. Much of what feels visually obvious depends on attention having touched it first, even if that touching is so quick it goes unnoticed. Brightness is not sensed as a simple reading of how much light reaches the eye, because the visual system judges light in relation to its surroundings. The same grey surface can seem lighter or darker, depending on the shades around it. A white cup in shadow may still look white, while a grey patch beside deep black can seem almost luminous. This happens because the brain is trying to understand the likely conditions of the scene, rather than report raw light alone. It compares edges, context, and probable illumination to build a stable impression of objects. Human sight is therefore deeply relative. The eye receives light, but the brain asks what that light most likely means. This helps people recognize things under very different conditions, from cloudy afternoons to bright kitchens to dim evening rooms. The world would feel much less steady if brightness was sensed in isolation. Context quietly helps vision keep the scene understandable. The ear can hear the pitch of a sound even when the lowest matching frequency is missing, a phenomenon often called the missing fundamental. If a set of higher harmonics is played without the actual lowest tone, many listeners still perceive the pitch that would belong to the full set. The brain seems to infer that absent bass note from the spacing of the frequencies that are present. This is one reason voices and instruments can still sound natural through imperfect systems that do not reproduce the full depth of the original sound. Human hearing is not merely collecting frequencies like a shelf storing objects. It is reading relationships and patterns. When enough pieces of the structure are present, the mind can restore part of what is not physically there. The result feels effortless and ordinary, yet it shows that pitch perception is a form of intelligent interpretation. The ear hears not only signals, but the hidden order among them. Loudness is shaped by both physics and perception, and the two do not rise in a simple one-to-one way. A sound wave can become physically far more intense without feeling proportionally many times louder to a listener. The ear and brain compress this immense range so that whispers, conversation, rainfall, and traffic can all fit within a usable sensory scale. This is practical because the world contains sounds of very different strength, and hearing must remain sensitive at the quiet end without becoming overwhelmed at the loud end. The mechanics of the ear and the processing of the nervous system both help manage that range. Human hearing is therefore not a straightforward gauge. It is a living system that reshapes enormous physical differences into something the mind can handle. Loudness feels immediate, but its meaning has already been filtered. The ear is not only open to the world, it is constantly moderating how strongly that world is allowed to arrive. Shape from shading is the visual skill that lets a flat pattern of light and dark appear as a rounded object, a hollow, or a raised edge. A circle shaded from top to bottom can look like a dome, while the same pattern reversed can seem like a dent. The brain interprets the gradation of light as a clue to depth, using assumptions about illumination and surface form. This ability is extremely useful because most objects do not reveal their shape through outline alone. Gentle changes in brightness often carry the information that makes a face look curved, a fold look deep, or a stone look smooth. Human vision is skilled at turning these soft gradients into solid form. The scene on the retina is flat, yet the world of perception feels sculpted and dimensional. A little shade becomes structure. The eye receives light, but the brain quietly turns that light into hills, plains, bowls, and contours spread throughout ordinary sight. The sense of effort is partly separate from the sense of body position, which is why lifting something heavy feels different from merely knowing where the arm is. When a person raises a full bucket or pushes open a stiff door, the experience includes not only movement and contact, but a strong inner sense of exertion. This seems to come partly from signals within muscles and tendons, and partly from the brain's own commands to move. Human action, therefore, carries an internal feeling of how hard the body is working. This matters because effort helps guide pacing, caution, and judgment. A hill may look gentle, yet the body quickly learns its true demand through effort. The same movement can feel easy one day and harder the next, depending on fatigue and condition. Among human senses, effort is one of the least discussed, yet it quietly shapes daily life, giving action its felt weight from the inside. Thirst is not a single simple message, but a layered internal sense shaped by the blood, the mouth, and the act of drinking itself. When the body needs water, internal signals help create the familiar desire to drink. Yet that desire can begin to ease before the water has fully entered the bloodstream, because the mouth and throat provide early information that drinking is underway. This fast feedback is useful. If the body had to wait for slower internal changes before adjusting thirst, regulation would be clumsier. Human interoception often works in stages like this, combining quick local cues with slower, deeper ones. The sensation of thirst is therefore both chemical and anticipatory. A cool drink can feel relieving almost immediately, even though full bodily balance takes longer to restore. The senses within the body are not passive meters waiting for final results. They help guide behavior moment by moment, using early signs to prepare the next step. Pain often arrives in more than one wave because different nerve fibers carry different kinds of warning at different speeds. A sudden injury may first produce a sharp, quick sensation that is easy to locate. After that, a slower, duller ache may spread and linger. These two phases are linked to separate pathways in the body and nervous system, each carrying useful information. The fast signal encourages immediate withdrawal. The slower signal helps protect the area afterward by discouraging overuse and keeping attention on the injury. Human pain is therefore not a single uniform alarm. It is more like a layered message with different tones and timing. Even when unpleasant, its structure reflects purpose. The body is not only saying that something happened, it is also saying how urgently to act now and how carefully to behave next. The changing texture of pain over time shows how finely tuned protective sensation can be. Scratching can reduce itch because the nervous system allows mild pain, and strong touch to interfere with itch signals. When the skin feels irritated, scratching creates new input that may partly suppress the original sensation, at least for a short time. This is one reason scratching feels so immediately satisfying. The body is not simply replacing one feeling with another by accident. Different pathways in the nervous system interact, and in this case, the new sensory event can weaken the old one. Yet the relief can come at a cost if scratching becomes too intense, since irritated skin may become more inflamed and start the cycle again. Human senses do not work in isolation. Itch, pain, and touch can all influence one another in practical and sometimes imperfect ways. The temporary comfort of scratching reveals that perception is a negotiation among signals. What the skin feels at one moment can be reshaped by what the hand does next. The ear judges how far away a sound is by combining several imperfect clues rather than by reading distance directly from the air. Loudness can help because nearby sounds are often stronger, but that clue is unreliable when the original source strength is unknown. The auditory system also uses the balance of direct sound to reflected sound, the loss of crisp high frequencies over distance, and the delay and character of echoes within the surrounding space. A voice in the next room, footsteps down a hall, and thunder far away all feel distant for slightly different acoustic reasons. Human hearing is therefore not only about direction, it also builds a rough sense of depth using patterns that arrive over time. This is especially useful in darkness or when vision is blocked. The world announces not just where something is, but how near or far it may be. The ear listens for distance in the shape that sound takes on its journey. Smells are often harder to name than sights or sounds, even when they are clearly familiar. A person may instantly recognize the scent of cinnamon, fresh-cut grass, soap, or an old library, yet struggle to put the correct word to it. This difficulty is not because smell is weak. In many cases, the opposite is true. The odor may feel vivid and unmistakable, while language lags behind. One reason seems to be that olfactory processing is closely tied to memory and feeling, while the pathways that support easy verbal labeling are less direct than they are for vision. Human senses do not all connect to words with the same ease. The nose often delivers recognition first and naming later, if naming comes at all. This gives smell a special quality. It can feel intimate, immediate, and strongly meaningful without becoming verbally neat. Some experiences arrive in consciousness more like atmosphere than like description. Taste preferences can be learned and reshaped by repeated exposure, which means the flavor world is partly educated over time. Foods that seem too bitter, sour, strong, or unfamiliar at first may gradually become pleasing as the brain and body grow used to them. Coffee, olives, fermented foods, strong cheeses, herbs, and spices often follow this path. Exposure does not guarantee affection, but it can reduce surprise and allow subtler qualities to emerge. Human taste is therefore not fixed in childhood as a permanent list of likes and dislikes. It remains plastic, shaped by culture, memory, context, and habit. What once seemed harsh may later feel deep, refreshing, or comforting. This is one reason cuisine varies so widely across the world, while still becoming natural to those who grow up with it. The mouth learns. Flavor is not only detected, it is slowly interpreted, revisited, and sometimes welcomed through familiarity. The Doppler effect lets the ear sense motion when a sound source moves past, because the pitch changes as the source approaches and then recedes. A passing train horn, ambulance siren, or motorcycle engine often seems higher in pitch on the way toward the listener and lower just after it passes. This shift happens because the sound waves are compressed in front of the moving source and stretched behind it. Human hearing can use that change as a clue to movement and direction, even without seeing the source clearly. The effect is one of the most elegant examples of sound carrying not just identity, but motion. A steady horn becomes a moving story through a change in pitch. The world is not silent about its own movement. It leaves traces in the sound pattern reaching the ear. For a listener standing still, a changing note can reveal approach, passing, and departure, all within a few calm seconds. Spinning can produce rhythmic eye movements called nystagmus, showing how strongly the balance system and the eyes are linked. When the body turns, fluid in the semicircular canals of the inner ear shifts and signals rotation. The eyes respond with a pattern that helps stabilize vision, then reset, then stabilize again. If spinning stops suddenly, the lingering movement of that inner ear fluid can briefly make the world seem to continue moving, even while the person is standing still. This is why dizziness after turning in circles can feel so convincing. The vestibular system is still reporting motion for a short time. Human balance depends on fluid, motion, and reflexes that are usually precise, but can be temporarily misled by unusual movement. Spinning reveals the machinery because it pushes the system beyond its ordinary calm range. The eyes and inner ears continue their conversation, and for a moment, the visible world seems to sway with it. Front and back sound locations can be surprisingly easy to confuse because the basic timing difference between the ears may be similar for sources in both positions. A sound directly in front and a sound directly behind can create overlapping left-right timing cues, which means the auditory system needs extra information to tell them apart. The shape of the outer ear helps by changing certain frequencies depending on where the sound comes from, and small head movements can add more evidence. This is why turning the head often improves auditory localization. Human hearing is wonderfully skilled, but it works by solving patterns rather than reading labels attached to the air. When the clues are incomplete, the system asks for more. A slight tilt or turn may be enough to settle the question. The ear does not passively accept ambiguity, it tests it. Even locating sound can involve small acts of investigation, using the body to clarify what space is saying. Crossing the fingers can create strange touch experiences, because the brain's usual map of body position is suddenly placed into an unusual arrangement. In a classic illusion, a small object touched between crossed fingertips may feel like two objects instead of one. The skin is receiving ordinary contact. but the brain interprets the signals using its long habit of those fingers being uncrossed. The unexpected posture disrupts the normal relationship between touch location and body position. This reveals something gentle and important about perception. Human touch does not depend on skin alone. It depends on skin plus a model of how the body is arranged in space. When that model is challenged, even a simple bead or pencil point can become confusing. The illusion is brief and harmless, but it shows that touch is always blended with posture. The hand does not merely feel, it feels through a body map the brain is constantly maintaining. The skin can perceive apparent motion even when nothing actually moves across it, as long as separate touches are delivered in the right order and timing. If two nearby points on the arm are tapped one after the other with a short delay, the sensation may feel like a single touch traveling between them. This is called apparent tactile motion, and it is a close relative of the way separate visual images can create the impression of continuous movement. Human senses often build smooth events from carefully spaced fragments. The brain is less interested in preserving every tap as isolated than in understanding the likely pattern behind them. This ability is useful because the real world often produces contact that unfolds over time, rather than in still points. It also shows how the nervous system creates continuity. A few separate touches can become a glide. The skin, like the eye and ear, can turn sequence into motion and scattered signals into one flowing event. Multisensory redundancy makes perception more reliable because the same event is often reported by more than one sense at once. A falling cup may be seen, heard, and felt through vibration in the floor. A speaker's words are carried by sound, but their face, gestures, and timing support the message too. This overlap is not wasteful. It makes perception more stable when one cue is weak or noisy. In darkness, hearing may guide. In loud surroundings, vision may help. During movement, touch and balance may confirm what the eyes suggest. Human senses are therefore arranged not as isolated specialists working alone, but as partners that back one another up. The world can still be understood when one channel is uncertain, because another is often offering a related clue. This quiet redundancy is one reason everyday life feels so solid. The senses do not merely add information. They protect the continuity of experience by sharing the work of knowing. The human senses spend an entire lifetime translating the world into experience. They turn light into color, pressure into texture, air into sound, and invisible molecules into scent and flavor. They tell us where the body ends and the world begins, and they also tell us where the body is, how it is moving, and what it quietly needs from within. Much of this happens so smoothly that it is easy to forget how extraordinary it is. Every ordinary day is carried by these hidden acts of perception. A room becomes familiar through its light, its echoes, its air, its surfaces, and the body's own silent knowledge of standing within it. The more closely we look at the senses, the less they seem like separate instruments, and the more they seem like a patient conversation. Vision borrows from movement. Hearing joins with balance. Taste depends on smell. Touch is shaped by posture and memory. Again and again, the body reveals that perception is not a collection of isolated signals, but a calm and continuous weaving together of many kinds of information. That weaving gives the world its steadiness. It gives objects their weight, voices their presence, places their atmosphere, and each moment its quiet sense of being real. Tonight's journey has been through systems so familiar that they often hide in plain sight, yet they are among the most remarkable things about being human. The senses do not merely decorate life, they make contact with it. They guide, protect, connect, and inform. They allow a person to walk through shadow, hear rain through a window, recognize a face, feel the warmth of a cup, or catch the scent of earth after rain, and know without effort that the world is near. As this gentle exploration comes to a close, you can let all of that quiet knowledge rest in the background again, where it has always been working faithfully for you. The senses will go on with their patient labor, whether noticed or not, keeping their soft watch over the living bridge between body and world. Sleep well. Good night.